Hi, welcome back to Scholastically Natalie. We're finally moving back into the reading territory. I recently bought Candide by Voltaire from Barnes & Noble's for $3 because it was on their cheap section. Candide's wonderful. I had to read it during college. It's a lot of fun and it genuinely made me laugh. So we're starting with the introduction of this Candide novel, which was published in 2018 by Arcturus Holdings Limited. Interesting. And so it does have a bit of an introduction with it, which is not the same as the one that I got from the library. So this intro is called All is for the Best in the Best of All Possible Worlds. So we're starting with what is Candide. So Voltaire's Candide is one of the best-known and most influential narratives of the 18th century. The young Candide, thrown out of his adopted home after a sexual indiscretion with the baron's daughter, rages over much of the world trying to win her back. He is carried along on a torrent of action, improbable in the extreme and packed almost beyond endurance with atrocities and barbarity. Yet Candide is not a novel in the modern sense of the word. The central characters of the young Candide, his beloved Cunegonde, and his tutor Pangloss and his companions Martin and the old woman, are not fully drawn personalities, and their exploits are barely credible. Instead, it is a conte philosophique, a philosophical tale that uses narrative to make a point and prompt deep thinking. The tale satirizes a popular philosophical position which Voltaire had himself once espoused, and calls on us to negotiate metaphysical issues that affect everyone. The universal relevance of the questions addressed in Candide has ensured the tale's enduring appeal for 250 years. Next we come to the section titled Candide, or Optimism. The subtitle of Candide, Optimism, defines the outlook of the young hero and refers to the 18th century doctrine of optimism, put forward by Gottfried Leibniz in his book Theodicy in 1710. Candide's attempts to root his life in optimist philosophy come unstuck as he faces one catastrophe after another. Optimism attempts to tackle the theological problem of evil, how an all-powerful and benign God can allow evil to flourish in his created world, by saying that there can have been no other way. Leibniz spells it out. Now the supreme wisdom cannot but have chosen the best. If there were not the best among all possible worlds, God would not have produced any. There is an infinitude of possible worlds, among which God must needs have chosen the best, since he does nothing without acting in accordance with supreme reason. All evil and misfortune, then, must have purpose and are necessary, even though we may not be able to discern their purpose. Early in his life, Voltaire was swayed by Leibniz's argument, but experience eroded his confidence in the optimist philosophy, much like Candide. He found it untenable in the face of the trauma and suffering that fills human life. For Voltaire, the final death knell for optimism was sounded by the terrible earthquake that struck Lisbon in Portugal on the 1st of November 1755. Up to 60,000 people died in the earthquake itself, in the ensuing tsunami, and in the fires which razed the ruins of the city. Sir Thomas Kendrick wrote at the time that the earthquake shocked Western civilization more than any other event since the fall of Rome in the 5th century. In a letter to a friend in December 1755, Voltaire wrote, "Optimism and all is well got it in the neck." And in his poem on the earthquake he pondered, "Why do we suffer under a just Lord? This is the knot which must be untied." It was the knot which would lie at the heart of Candide, published in 1759. Committed optimists explained away even a calamity of this magnitude. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, philosopher and author of The Social Contract, argued that God was not concerned with the fate of individuals. He said that it was the fault of the inhabitants of Lisbon for building homes that were not earthquake-proof and for crowding into the city instead of living naturally in the countryside. If so, I shudder to think of what is going to happen to all of our cities. The optimist view of the catastrophe is parodied in Candide on page 28. All this is for the best, for if there is a volcano in Lisbon, then it cannot be anywhere else. It is impossible that things should not be as they are, for all is well. Dr. Pangloss teaches Candide that there is no effect without a cause in this best of all possible worlds, on page 14. Candide initially accepts Dr. Pangloss's optimist view without question, but increasingly he struggles to accommodate the hardships and cruelties he witnesses and endures. Like the Roman Emperor Diocletian, who ruled for 21 years, then retired to grow cabbages at the very end of his adventures, Candide retires to tend his garden. He is resigned to the failure of the doctrine of optimism and has found that humankind endures rather than triumphs over adversity. This endurance is a necessity. It does not spring from any great philosophical ideal, but it is all that is possible. And that, I think, is a more cynical or doomed view of the world. I'm interested, once we reach the end of the garden, what you guys think it really means. Voltaire begins undermining the optimist view from the first chapter. To the familiar trope accepted and propounded by Candide, the best of all possible worlds, he adds the ridiculous extension. The Baron's castle was the most magnificent of castles, and his lady the best of all possible baronesses, on page 14. He gives Pangloss a ludicrous justification of Leibniz's assertion that everything has a purpose, and there is sufficient reason for the world being as it is. It is proven, he said, that things cannot be otherwise than as they are, for all being created for an end, all is necessarily for the best end. Observe that noses have been formed to carry spectacles, so we have spectacles. Legs are visibly designed for breeches, and we wear breeches. Page 14. Obviously, this is a really funny piece of satire, because of course it's not that noses and legs were made for the specific things that we created for them, it's that we created things for these specific shapes because we needed them. And then we have the heading of Candide's adventures. The extremes of suffering to which Candide is exposed would be more than enough to disillusion most optimists. Already, by the end of the second chapter, he has lost his beloved, been exiled, been press-ganged into the army, and run the gauntlet of 2,000 men twice, receiving 4,000 blows, which laid bare all his muscles and nerves from the nape of his neck right down to his rump, on page 18. The ensuing narrative continues the catalogue of disasters, tragedies, and agonies visited on Candide, his companions, and his beloved Cunegonde. All these are told in rollicking, speedy succession. The tale owes much to the picaresque style epitomized in English in the novels of Smollett and Defoe, in which episode is piled upon episode in an implausible, unending stream. There is little time for development of character or evocation of scene and sentiment, which is kind of common in most, comedic things, especially comedic writing, because you kind of have to pile on the absurdity to make satire work. So then we have the little subsection called, Who was Voltaire? François-Marie Hérault, born either the 21st of November or 20th of February 1694, was the son either of the notary François-Marie Arouet or of an officer called Rochebrune. Thus, Voltaire was of uncertain birth date, uncertain parentage, and was not called Voltaire. His mother died when he was 7, and he did not get on with his legal father. Instead, he formed a close attachment to his godfather, the Epicurean Abbé de Chateauneuf, I think, who introduced him to the famous courtesan and literary figure Ninon de L'Enclos. She was 84 at the time. In her will, Ninon left the young Voltaire money to buy books. He attended the Jesuit college in Paris, where he enthusiastically embraced the culture and society, but rejected the religious aspects of his education. He was permanently affected by the last years of the reign of Louis XIV and the religious persecution that he witnessed. He spoke out for civil liberties of all types and against religious persecution throughout his life. The young Arouet took a job as an ambassadorial secretary in the Netherlands, but the scandal of his infatuation with a young woman had him sent back to Paris. There he made a name for himself, writing witty epigrams, but was soon in trouble for mocking the regent, the Duc d'Orléans. D'Orléans? I'm not sure how you say that with a French accent. He was banished from Paris and imprisoned in the Bastille for nearly a year in 1717. While in prison, he wrote his first play, the tragedy Oedipe, which was a resounding success and established him as a writer. He adopted the name Voltaire in 1718. After an argument with the Chevalier de Rohan, Voltaire was in trouble again and spent 2 years in exile in England. Already attracted to the freedom of speech and thought tolerated in England, Voltaire learned English and associated with leading literary figures Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, and William Congreve. He was particularly impressed by the work of John Locke and Isaac Newton. His writing became gradually more philosophical, culminating in his Lettres philosophiques, 1734, a jewel of Enlightenment philosophy in which he expounds the principle that the goal of mankind is to achieve equality and happiness for all through the application of reason in science and the arts. He dismissed Blaise Pascal's goal of bliss attained through penitence and suffering. The Lettres set the tone for the progress of Western civilization and secured Voltaire's intellectual place amongst the French revolutionaries who would take up the fight only 11 years after his death. In some quarters, Voltaire has even been held responsible for the French Revolution. The publication of Letters Philosophiques caused an outcry, and a warrant was issued for Voltaire's arrest. Sorry, I accidentally flipped 2 pages. He took refuge in the chateau of the beautiful Madame de Châtelet, where the two lived a sumptuous life steeped in culture. Their time together ended tragically when Madame de Châtelet died in childbirth in 1749 after an affair with the poet's son Lambert. In 1758, Voltaire bought the estate of Ferney on the Franco-Swiss border. He spent the last 20 years of his life there, and it was where he wrote Candide. Voltaire died in 1778, but a few months after his triumphal return to Paris. He was buried at the Abbey of the Ciliers, shortly before the arrival of an order prohibiting his Christian burial. His remains are now in the Pantheon in Paris. In his life and writings, he campaigned tirelessly for religious tolerance and the abolition of barbarous punishments. He argued for a theistic stance in which simple worship supplants the complications and machinations of the Church. Constantly speaking out against the abuses of the Church and civil authority, he was often in trouble, exiled, imprisoned, and denounced. He battled, too, against the emerging Romantic movement in philosophy and literature. Besides his philosophy and philosophical tales, Voltaire wrote plays, poetry, pamphlets, and over 2,000 letters, and perhaps the first science fiction story. His tale, Micromegas, tells of 2 extraterrestrial beings who visit Earth. The Lettres Philosophiques and Candide have been constantly reprinted. Most of Voltaire's other writings have slipped into obscurity. This introduction was written by Anne Rooney of Cambridge in 2009. So I am pretty excited to reread Candide with you guys. It's a pretty short story and it's very silly. I had a lot of fun reading it when I had to study it for a class, and I think Voltaire's sense of humor still shines through extremely well. Let me know if you guys are excited about Candide, if you're interested in Candide. It is only, as I flipped to the end of the book very quickly, it's only 128 pages long, and we just got to page 12. And the chapters are definitely very short. The language is probably going to be a bit more complex, more like a vindication of the rights of women, but I love that type of language, so I guess you guys are kind of stuck with me to suffer. So, let me know how you feel about kind of like optimism versus a more cynical view in life. I don't know if I'd argue that Candide is kind of like saying you shouldn't be optimistic at all and we're like resigned to just kind of powering through crises or like suffering. I don't know if I'd say that. Because it kind of ends on like this kind of like bittersweet, hopeful note to me. So I think it's kind of like a, but we can always try to be better story for me. But again, we'll see when we get to the end. That's how I interpret it, at least. I try not to think that all stories are meant to be kind of sad. So, let me know how you feel about this, if you're excited, if you think this is kind of like an interesting philosophical thing. I apologize for any and all terrible French pronunciations. I'm having trouble saying words today, in case you didn't notice. My brain's like, we're not doing that. But anyways, I'd like to go to bed sometime soon, so that I can be alive for work tomorrow. But yet, somehow I always manage to not do that properly. Anyways, I hope you will have an awesome day. I'm not sure when I'll be publishing this video, so I will see you whenever I publish this, and I hope you have had a great day and will have a great rest of your week. I'll see you in the next one, and Scholastically Natalie is out.